Canadian media. CMG Freelance offers union representation for freelancers in precarious times, including one-on-one contract support, discounted access to health benefits, a membership to lynda.com, and more. And you can learn more and join our union at cmgfreelance.ca. This webinar is also co-hosted by CWA Canada Associate Members, which is a free union membership that supports students and interns as they build careers in the Canadian media. You can visit emergingmediaworkers.ca to join for free. So this is the 9th workshop we've hosted this year. We'll continue this webinar series throughout the year. And while attendance to these live webinars is free to the public, the recordings of the webinars are reserved for members. So as a freelance member, you can access the recordings through logging on to cmgfreelance.ca. As an associate member, you can access the recordings through the link in your e-newsletter. And we should be able to get going with Arti soon, so I'm going to introduce her now. Arti Patel is a national online journalist of Smart Living at GlobalNews. She's an award-winning reporter and editor with a focus on health, women's issues, relationships, and awareness around racism and gender equality. Getting her foot at the door in the door at the Huffington Post Canada's Toronto office, Arti started as an intern and worked as an editor in the lifestyle department for almost 6 years. With a deep passion for storytelling since her Ryerson University journalism days, she has also dabbled in long-form features on mental health and divorce, in-house produced videos, and hosted several segments for lifestyle channels. Now, the thing is what Arti and I were talking about just for the last couple of minutes is where our chat box went, which is normally down at the lower left. I don't see it there now, but that's where questions will appear, where you can type your questions. I will try to fix this while Arti is talking. Hopefully, suddenly that chat box will pop up there. So we'll have a short Q&A session at the end of Arti's presentation. So welcome, Arti, and take it away. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much, Don. And yeah, hopefully we can get this chat situation figured out because I'd love to hear some questions. So I guess I can go right through the presentation that I had, and I really, very casual. This is just sort of how I am, but this is sort of my understanding of what it means to work in lifestyle journalism and what it means to be a reporter in lifestyle, especially in Canada and especially today where I think personally, a lot more can be done in lifestyle journalism. So I guess introduction, Don already sort of gave you my entire bio, but yes, I do work at GlobalNews. I've been here for 7 months now, working in the Smart Living section. So I mostly focus on lifestyle and health, relationships, parenting, any type of traditional lifestyle content. But we also focus a lot on viral news, so things that are happening in the news right now, studies, and sort of building on that news in a lifestyle perspective. Previously, I was at the Huffington Post for many years, where I sort of got my dabble into lifestyle journalism. When I was there, I was also freelancing, so I wrote for a couple of style and fashion publications, beauty publications, and prior to that, I was at Ryerson University. As Don mentioned, mostly I cover stories around themes of relationships, and that can be both romantic and non-romantic, healthy living, which to me includes mental health, nutrition, diet, wellness, viral news, which can really be anything and everything, especially in this sort of news cycle. And my passions lay around gender equality, diversity, and really bringing more voices to the lifestyle platform. And there's my Twitter if you want to follow. So I guess the first thing is just, why lifestyle? And I think, I don't want to talk a lot about myself, but, something that I always like to ask people when I meet them who are lifestyle reporters and journalists is why they got into lifestyle to begin with. And for me, it was not really ever a career goal of mine. Like I thought I would work in news. I did work in news before doing lifestyle, and I have a huge interest in news, but I think lifestyle just sort of came upon me. I always was interested in it, but I never saw myself doing it because I could never relate to it. So, when I used to read a lot of these magazines or websites growing up, a lot of the stories I just did not find relatable as a, young woman of color, as a South Asian person. I just couldn't relate to a lot of the content I was reading. Or the faces or the sources. And for me, it was just sort of an offside thing, like, okay, lifestyle is probably not something that I'm going to end up in. But when I started working in it, I realized the potential there is in lifestyle journalism. And I know for a lot of people, there's this idea that it's very fluffy or it's not serious, but it can be very serious. Yes, there's a fun aspect to it, but I think it tells really important stories that readers, frankly, really care about and want to read, and not just read the headlines. So for me personally, I love the idea of telling personal stories. And I think for news, it's always great to report what happened, but lifestyle allows you to expand on that. It allows you to tell you what happened on the perspective of someone who was there, or someone who's experienced it, or someone who is afraid of it, which to me, it can be a very, very powerful tool in storytelling. Stories can be longer, stories can be personal, stories can be short, and stories can be evergreen. And when I say evergreen, which is a very fun term in lifestyle, it means that they're kind of forever. When I can, write about something that's health related or mental health related or nutrition related that you can read in January or you can read in December, and the story won't be out of style in that sense. So it's not trendy. And that allows journalists and editors to sort of build cycles and calendars around, what readers want to read at a specific time of the year. So my third point there is lifestyle is a cycle. And this could be a good thing and a bad thing. I think it becomes a very routine cycle. So for the entire year, you sort of know what's happening. You know which holidays are happening. You know which month is dedicated to which illness or whatever. But it also allows you time to plan ahead, which is great, which is something that you can't really do in news or breaking news. Lifestyle is about color. And when I say color, I mean it really focuses on the details. It's really about telling stories of, things that you may have missed, or things that you aren't thinking about, or pockets of communities that, just don't really get a say. An example that I always like to think about is the city of Scarborough, or the suburb of Scarborough. I live there now, or lived there in the past, but when I was younger, I used to live in Toronto, and this idea of Scarborough to me was what I used to read on the news, what I used to watch on CP24 or City News, where it's, this crime and this crime and this crime. And I actually went to a workshop when I was quite young as a teen about media representation, and I learned, how much color can affect a story. And that day it was about Scarborough specifically, and about all these great things that were happening in Scarborough, these really cool community stories, local stories that weren't being reported, and was sort of changing people's perspective on what the suburb was like. And that always stuck to me, even though it's not lifestyle related, but it always shows me that you can go beyond just sort of telling what the news is, which goes into my next point of lifestyle expanding news. And when I say it expands news, I think it really adds more to it. So when you see a big study come out, or when you see a big trend happening in the news, especially right now in Hollywood, there's a lot of talk obviously around sexual assault and sexual harassment. From a lifestyle perspective, it's really to take a step back and build that story out into further folios and further research. How does it affect women? How does it affect non-celebrities? This has been happening forever. What can the police do? What can communities do? What can we do together? There's so many stories that can come out of the news. So that's another aspect I like too. There's also a variety of voices. And again, it's one of the reasons why I love working in this field so much, is that you really get to explore, the non-celebs and the local people and the people who don't really get a chance to, ever share this story. And when I write stories, I try to focus on getting, Canadians of all ages and all aspects of Canada to really give their input, because, you want to read a different story. You don't want to read the same story over and over again. And at the end of the day, you have to remember that lifestyle is also a business, and so is journalism, and it clicks. And, a lot of people do call it fluff, and that's something that I have to deal with as a reporter for a while, but this is a story that these are the stories people want to read. These are the stories that are on your Facebook feed or on your Twitter feed that you go through and you click. Sometimes you question them, why am I reading this? But at the same time, we can definitely go into, expanding stories that are really important. So basically, I want to break down different perspectives of lifestyle journalism, the interview, the structure of a story, and then give a little bit more insight to how I find ideas. And hopefully this is helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know. So the first thing is the interview. And the interview is so important, and I know this is a journalism basic, but I think in lifestyle it's always extra important because you're not just reporting statistics. You're not reporting something that happened. You really need to add to a story. So your source itself needs to be challenged almost in a way that they're going to tell you something that's a little bit different than what ABC is reporting. And the first thing I always do is do my research. And I know that's easy to say, and it might be a little bit hard to do if you're stuck with time. But always look into the source and what they do and what they specialize in. If you're trying to find something about a burn, for example, like this morning, I was looking for a story. I'm not going to just go to call up Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto and say, hey, do you know anyone? I could go to the burn unit or the rehab unit for burn victims and see which doctors specialize there. So first is always do your research. Second, I always like to see how other sources covered that particular source. So if I'm interviewing a doctor, for example, that led a big study, I want to see what they told the CBC. I want to see what they told the Today Show. I want to see what they told ABC. This way, yes, they might say similar stuff to me because we're asking the same questions, but then it also gives me insight of what I already know. And I can build further on those questions that journalists at CBC had already asked. Have a list of questions ready to go. Sometimes I don't always follow this rule because I like to go with the conversation, but in the back of my mind, or at least I would like to have 5 or 6 questions because sometimes you don't know how your sources are going to react. I call people sometimes and they talk a lot. I call people sometimes and they don't talk at all. So, you really don't know how your source is going to be, especially if they're not used to talking to the media. At the end of the day, you have to remember that a lot of people don't talk to outlets. And for them, it might be hard to put together sentences. So it's always good to just have those questions as backup, just so you can ask. Always ask if there's anything that they want to add. This is a rule that a professor taught me when I was at Ryerson, and I use it every day when I work. But when I finish an interview, I always ask what they want to add to it, or if there's something that I missed, or if there's something that I'm not thinking about, or what else are they thinking about if it's a certain topic. And I will assure you, they will tell you something that you probably use at the beginning of your story versus the end. Also ask them to lead you to another source. This may not always work, but a lot of the cases when you talk to experts, especially in lifestyle, you deal with a lot of health experts, nutrition experts, or diet experts, but it's always good to ask them if they know anyone else in their field, if they have a colleague, if they have a coworker who might give more insight. And for them, it's always good to give a shout out to other people that they know. And for me and for the reporter, it's always good to expand your source list. Another thing I always like to say is just ask people to explain things simply. And when you work in health especially, you have doctors who use really big words and really big phrases, what the average person doesn't understand. I don't even understand. So when I'm reading through studies, I always ask them, what did you mean by this? What is a subgroup analysis? That's one of the questions I asked today. Really expand on those terms because it could be very basic to them, but for the average person, they may have no idea what they're talking about. And never assume anything about your source, ever. Not their name, not their title, not how they identify themselves or what community or what group. Just always ask those questions, even if they're uncomfortable. Go to my next page. So, for example, in action, these are examples that have happened to me. So I had interviewed someone once, and I didn't double check with their PR person. A lot of the times when you interview a source who works in health, for example, their PR person is usually the one that you're dealing with, and they tell you, okay, well, Dr. Smith can talk about blah, blah, blah. So one day I was doing an interview with the doctor, and the doctor had emailed me actually. And I was just looking through their email, and sometimes I just grab their title from their signature. And I had grabbed their title, and I ended up Googling the doctor anyway, and I realized the titles were completely different. So I emailed the doctor and I said, "Hey, your title shows up different on your page and in your email. Which one is it?" And then they're like, "Oh, um, I actually forgot to update my email signature," which is something a lot of people may not do or may do. So luckily, I caught it beforehand. But there are many times where in the past I've just looked at a signature and taken the email. One time I had interviewed a woman who identified themselves as she, and I didn't know that. So I had quoted them as he in my article, and then I got an email later. This was a few years ago. I got an email later saying, sorry, but our source identifies as a she. And I'm like, okay. And I know might be an uncomfortable question to ask, but it's always, just good to confirm. And lastly, it's knowing the material when you interview an author. This hasn't happened to me a lot. I don't interview authors a lot, but I've had stories in the past and colleagues of mine who sort of talk to authors without reading books, or talk to an expert without knowing exactly what they're talking about. At the end of the day, it just sort of makes the reporter look unprepared, and you don't want that either. So always do a little bit of that research, and especially if you're going to read a book or if you're going to interview an author, read the book. And at the end of the day, they're going to not only will they appreciate it, but you're going to get a better quote or nugget out of that interview versus simply asking, why did you write this book, which is a question people ask. And one thing that I didn't include in here, but I always like to do with some of my friends, is if I have a big interview coming up, I just always practice. It's not something that you can do all the time, but if you're working on something down the road which may be a little bigger, I always go to, a friend who isn't even in journalism and just sort of ask questions. And I always find people who don't work in our field will always come back with better questions than you have. And that, I don't know if that's just me, but that's something that I like to do too here and there, especially if I have something big coming up and I want to just get a feeler out there. So the second thing I want to talk about is structure of a lifestyle story. And lifestyle stories and news stories can be quite similar, but I think the difference is in lifestyle, you really need to add context and you really need to add depth into your story, because at the end of the day, you're building on a story that already exists. You're reporting on something and adding to it. You're expanding it. And so you really just can't give readers, the bare bones of what you're saying. You really need to add more to it. So, for example, the lead is very important. One of my professors told me in the past, if I don't like your lead and I'm not into it, then I'm not going to read your story. And that's true. We look at our culture in general, readers are reading less, readers are reading more on their phones, readers are just reading headlines. You want to make sure your lead is grabby enough that it lets readers in. And you don't want to be so clickbaity either. You don't want to give everything away, but you want to give some importance that they're going to read your story. The second is nut graph. And a nut graph is basically the paragraph that describes exactly why the reader should continue reading what they're reading. And to me, the nut graph, I think, is the most important piece, is because it really distinguishes why people should care. And that's, at the end of the day, the most important thing. A story might be really important to me, but another reader or another person may not even think anything of it. So it's my job as a reporter and the writer to really make someone else care about this specific story. For lifestyle, it's always good to have statistics. You always do a good search on StatsCan. And a good thing about StatsCan is you can even call them and request stats. I've done many stories in the past where statistics were not available online, but they do exist. And all you have to do is call them up. A lot of it's public information. Tell them that you're writing a story, and they will be more than happy to put together data for you. Choose quotes that are powerful and choose them carefully. I'm not perfect. I don't think there are a lot of reporters who are. There are times where we choose quotes for the sake of choosing quotes because we need that quote from, blank organization. But, really choose quotes that I think stand on their own. And when I say that, I mean choose quotes that, you don't want to write yourself. And that's always another rule that I had picked up in J school too. Break up your text. There are so many publications that have really, really chunky paragraphs in their articles. And if you think about the average reader now is reading on their phone, no one is going to scroll through this giant paragraph. Break everything up, even if it looks silly. Try to do two sentence graphs. It actually looks way better, and it's a better experience too. Not all quotes are good quotes, which kind of goes back to the first point about quotes. But sometimes quotes, again, are just people talking, and that's all they are, right? People are talking, and sometimes when they're talking, they're not saying much. So really the quote should really add to your nut graph. It should really, blow that nut graph out of the water. Add color. So color is something that I love to add. Talk about if you're interviewing someone in person, it's always good to talk about what they're wearing, how their posture is, how they're sitting, what the environment is like. When I do interviews, when I've done longer features, I sometimes just tell people I'm going to do a call with you and it's just going to be about color. And I remember a story that I wrote a few years ago now about mental health in the Black community in Canada. I talked to a source who told me that he used to go to church with his mom. He just kept talking about going to church with his mom. And one day I called him and I was like, hey, let's just talk about church with your mom. I don't want to know anything about anything else. Just tell me about this church. And for 40 minutes, we talked about this church. We talked about what it smelled like, what it looked like, where it was, how many people were there, what these women were dressed, what they were saying, what they were doing. And it really, out of 45 minutes, I probably got two sentences to actually use, but it really gives you perspective of at that time what that source was going through. And for me, that added color to my story. Quote, ending a story, a lifestyle story is always, there's the hamburger formula, the pyramid formula, whatever you want to call it. You want to sort of give a call to action or end with a solution or end with thoughts. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I've seen all kinds of stories, especially in lifestyles, a lot of service journalism, which is also important. So, you want people to reach out for help. You want people to reach out hotlines or reach out to organizations or donate to a certain cause or whatever the case may be. There really is no specific way to end the story. And lastly, I think is probably the most important thing is your sources and keeping them diverse. And when I say diverse, it's just in lifestyle, what you tend to see is the experts are really the same experts in every publication. So you have your superstar nutrition or dietitian who will be interviewed by hundreds of publications all the time, and then there are some who may not have any press at all who has the same amount of knowledge. So once in a while, I always like to go through a data search of a directory of dietitians, for example, to see sort of what else people have to offer and what else are we talking about. You don't always have to go back to the same one or two or three sources to tell your story. Diversify it. And for them, it's good for you to get more intellect and just more aspects of a different source. But it also helps you build your portfolio. And building a source portfolio is very important lifestyle. I would say is the number one thing, because
Well, it looks like we've lost Arti here. There she is. Hang on, everybody. Hi, Arti, we've lost you. Uh-oh, okay. Well, I'll do some filling, and you go ahead and okay, and we'll get you back on. All right, so Artie's computer just died, so I'm going to just take her off for now, so you don't see that kind of deal there. Let's see. I have to tell you that this webinar thing, turn off the audio, turn voice off, turn video off, and you should now eventually just get me. Yes, just getting to the best part. I don't know why I can't turn the video off. It's kind of annoying. You know. Well, you just have to look at me in this little box, I guess. Anyway, while we're waiting for Artie to come back on here, and we would like to continue the webinar, I do want to tell you about another opportunity that we're going to be offering. Well, I've got a couple of things to tell you about, and I'll do that now as opposed to at the end of the webinar. So uh, the next webinar we're going to do is on LinkedIn. And this is with Kat Stearns, and she is a social media expert that we've had on for Twitter and for Facebook. And the next kind of social media platform she's going to tackle um, is LinkedIn. And if you're like me, you have a LinkedIn account and you have lots of people asking to be linked with you, and you say yes, and then what do? Not too much with it. So I think Kat will be able to tell us how to really spend some time using it. Artie has just texted me it's restarting, so that's good. Her computer, that is. So the other thing I wanted to tell you about is there's a company in Toronto called the New School of Finance, and it's kind of a very hip and with it and down to earth um, company that teaches people about how to deal with finances, especially if you're a freelancer. They've got something called the Sole Proprietor School. It's everything you need to know. This is from their website. It's everything you need to know to cover your butt as a Canadian sole proprietor and run your business like a boss. And I can tell you that having been a freelancer for a long time, it's sometimes quite difficult to kind of keep your business things all in one place, all up to date, to file your taxes on time, to know about HST and GST. So the Sole Proprietor School tells you all about this stuff: taxes, HST, GST, revenue, expenses, and business viability. Um, we need, as freelancers, to be able to run ourselves like a business, and that's why we sometimes have to charge the GST or HST. It's why we have to pay taxes. It's why we keep those tax receipts and all the other receipts the expenses that you spend to make your living. So this is where Sole Proprietor School turns in, and you're wondering why I'm telling you about this. It's because CMG Freelance has purchased a whole pile of places in Sole Proprietor School. This is an online program. You learn at your own pace, but they also have um, office hours. So you can go on with the instructor certain times of the week and ask questions, get some answers, things like that. So um, anyway, they will answer things like, can you work less? How much do you charge? What do you need to make? How much do you need to sell? Or how much do you need to work? Can you ever go on vacation? Just tell me what I need to do. This will all be happening in the Sole Proprietor School. So as I said, we have purchased a number of seats in the school, virtual seats, and those will all be, some of them will be for our existing members, and some of them will be for members who want to join, or for new members who would like to join and take advantage of the offer. So look for news of Sole Proprietor School very soon, probably within the next couple of weeks, on our outlet, cmgfreelance.ca, and also on the Storyboard. And that is thestoryboard.ca, and that's our blog where we put lots of different stories about freelance life, freelance living in there as well. So Sole Proprietor School coming up soon, as well as a webinar on the uh, the art of using LinkedIn as a journalist for freelancers, and that'll be coming up soon too. So that's what I wanted to tell you all about, and I had hoped that Artie would be back on by now. I don't see her there yet, so we'll keep on going. I should mention that my background is definitely in kind of lifestyle writing. I have been a food and travel journalist for many years. I do a little bit less of it now because I'm doing a lot more stuff for CMG freelance right now. but I definitely started out as a general reporter and decided to start freelancing and specializing in uh, food journalism, especially, and travel journalism kind of came along because they go hand in hand. And so I definitely know what she's talking about here and the importance of getting that color, getting that lead, especially. I also teach food and travel writing uh, courses for UBC, so I can plug myself. If you're interested in something like that, you can always get in touch with me. Easiest way to get in touch with me, by the way, is freelance@cmg.ca. So still waiting for Artie to come back here. We're still within our window of time that we want to run the webinar. If anybody wants to ask me any questions, I'll certainly look in the chat box here and see what's going on with that. So I don't want to put everybody back into the waiting room, but if anybody wants to chat about anything in the freelance world, in the lifestyle writing world, then go right ahead. And I'm not seeing anybody chatting here. I don't think we've lost a couple of people, which I understand totally. But definitely fire up the chat box if you like. So maybe I can ask some questions of you that you can chat that put in there. So can I ask you how you heard about this webinar? And just type that into the chat box, just so we get a sense of, we try to advertise in different places in there. Yes, thank you. Wendy from Twitter, great. Megan Gilmore from the mailing list, which we have. Megan is one of our members, so we send things out to her. Anybody else? Oh, I think Artie's back. All right, here we go. Let me put Artie on. There's a video on, voice on. I should tell people that have been a radio host in the past, which is why I can just babble on and ad lib almost ad infinitum.
This is my luck to work on the internet and have the one day where the internet stops working. Here's for
Lovely. Okay, so I did notice somebody said on the chat here, um, Janine said, "Dang, getting to the best part." So
yeah.
anyway, she's going to be back
And it
here.
would make a good anecdote. It's true. It'd make a good anecdote
Yeah,
of how to host a webinar. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, all right. I'm going to turn myself off again here now, and I'll let you
Okay.
carry on.
All right. So we were talking structure. Let's go back to structure. Ooh. So another thing that I sort of just in structure is just it might be a little bit repetitive sometimes, and I find this too, especially when you're writing in lifestyle, you tend to sort of have the same formula of how you write. And I think that's important because, it helps you distinguish what is your style of writing, basically. But the one good thing about lifestyle is that, you don't need to be afraid of really playing with your words. And I have some examples that I'm going to just sort of throw into the chat because I can't open them here. But there are times where I have to write about things that are, super basic, like superfoods, but you really allow yourself to just play with it. I think that's okay. And I think it really helps you sort of get a personality in your writing too. And when I started in lifestyle, that was one of the biggest things that I struggled with in the beginning is really writing for personality because I just didn't know how to do that. I was, really taught to write as a news reporter and, write facts and write statements. But when you actually work in lifestyle, you realize that you really need to focus on being able to add more to your graphs and more to your words. So I shared a story there. Another one about quotes is just really the importance of quotes. And you can read these later if you want, but it's a story that I did about this mother who was breastfeeding, and one of her photos went super viral. And she has a really sad face, and the quotes from that story of why she decided to do it it's just stuck out to me so much. And I could have easily asked her, well, why did you, put it, why did you expect it to go viral? Which is a question that people love to ask. But it's really just asking about the emotion. And for her, why did this make you cry? Why does breastfeeding make you cry? And then lastly, the nut graph, which again is really important. And here's another example of a story. So I'm going to get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but sometimes, a story that you have may not be a traditional story. It may be a story that you don't think is a story. And I think that's some of the other beauty of lifestyle, is that you can really just sort of, share a story that is both.
And she's got again. What happened there? Hang on. I think in the chat box that she just did, the last one uh, is there twice. The last link is there twice. Arti, I think you're back
I am back.
now. Okay, good.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there either, but the link should be only once there. It's a story that I wrote about dating in the Muslim community. And sort of when I was looking at this story, you read dating stories all the time and relationship stories, but the nut graph here that I wanted to highlight, this is an example of a nut graph that I wrote. I'll read it to you, but I'll tell you a little bit about the importance of it later. But the story itself was about these two women who started a dating service for Muslim women, Muslim men and women to date. And my nut graph that I went with was, apps like Minder, the Muslim version of Tinder, and Muzzmatch, sometimes that can be overwhelming, has options. With other apps like Bumble, Tinder, Muslims have plenty in the pool. But when 39-year-old Bano Murtaji of Brampton started noticing Muslims around her were struggling to find love, she wondered if it had something to do with faith. So the story itself, you know, dating is a universal topic, right? Dating is something that a lot of people struggle with. It doesn't have to be a specific race or religion. But I think specifically what stuck out to me most about this is, these women created this service because they wondered if this was something because they were Muslim, were they not getting matches? Were people not having a hard time? So that curiosity to me, led to this story. And then next, let me see if I can get there. Lastly, I would say the most important thing is the story idea. And I think that's the most fun thing working in lifestyle, is that you could come up with really fun ideas. And not just that, but you really get to create news yourself. And I think that's the biggest takeaway of lifestyle, because sometimes stories aren't stories until you make them stories. And I have plenty of examples of this that I've done in the past few years where, I've taken conversations that I've had with friends and family members and turned them into features. And the outcome is great because you realize how much people can relate. So the first thing is, when you're thinking about ideas, and if you're freelancing and you're thinking about pitching to publications, some of the things that I used to do when I freelanced was, really read the news. Number one, read the news. What's in the news right now? What are people talking about? What's trending? What's viral? What are publications covering? What are US magazines covering? What's on the cover of Time? What's the latest development in blank? Another good tidbit for lifestyle, if you're interested in freelancing, is you should really join mailing list of universities, especially Canadian ones. So as a rule for journalists, get to know the people who work in the media departments and the PR departments of these schools, because usually they have studies that come out. You're blasted sort of a big study, and you're allowed to look at it. Sometimes reporters get them in advance, sometimes publications cover it, but if you have really good story ideas, you would be able to come up with them based on just looking at the study. So that's one key thing that I learned too. And I sort of subscribe to all kinds of things, not just Canadian universities, but Harvard, Yale, big universities who put out a lot of studies. There are a lot of websites too that you can sign up for alerts, and I can go a little bit. I'm not sure if I mentioned Google, but I'll remind me to mention Google after because I love Google. But there are some things that I do to look for story ideas as well. Um, so what's in the news is the number one thing. But the second thing is just talk to people. Like that is my number one piece of advice is just talk to people who don't work in journalism and ask them, it's kind of nosy, but we're journalists, so that's what we do. But ask them, what's bothering you lately? You know, what's the dating world like today? What did you see at a wedding that you went to last week that was interesting? Tell me about some health, if you had a health scare. And you will be surprised. There are tons of stories that come out. And for anyone who is a parent, join those groups, join mom, dad groups and community groups and on Facebook, and you will see all kinds. I'm not a parent, but I join some of these groups just to get ideas sometimes. But you will find all kinds of stories that the average, reporter just isn't thinking about because we're thinking sort of outside, we're thinking about everybody else, but these are the people who are thinking about these stories all the time. And this has happened to me so many times where, I have a conversation with a friend that can lead to a story. Even today with my editor, Dawn, we were talking about an experience that I had at an airport this weekend, and something that keeps happening to me is because my name is on a watch list because I share a name with a criminal apparently. So and when I posted this on Facebook that it was bothering me, I wasn't thinking about it as a story. A lot of people commented or like, oh, my dad has the same problem. Oh, my mom has the same problem. So just from that, I was like, oh, maybe this could be a story too. So really sometimes it's just analyzing your own life and what you're talking about. I mentioned before that lifestyle is a cycle. So it's always important when you're pitching as a freelancer to publications, you should know what cycle you're in. And when I say cycle, I mean literally have a calendar, in your own sort of agenda with the topics that are relevant right now. So right now for lifestyle, breast cancer awareness is huge because it's October. So, if I'm going to be pitching, I want to pitch, the months leading up to it. I don't want to pitch something in November. Not to say that you can't write about breast cancer later, but if you want to be part of this cycle, and most publications work in that cycle, you want to get to it beforehand. Follow the right feeds and clean up your feeds. I think that's important too. So if you have a personal account and a professional account, some people use one, I use one. I go once in a while to just really clean up my feeds, really clean up my Facebook feeds, follow the right people that I want to follow, follow the influencers and the publications that I like to read in lifestyle, and just make sure they're on the top of my feeds. I do that on Twitter, I do that on Instagram, just because you don't want things to be cluttered. And a lot of the times you'll find great stories that come right out of social media. People are talking about something, people are sharing something. If you're in a group, they're sharing something. And one of the things that I struggled with in the beginning is sort of having really cluttered feeds. And, you don't have to be super active, but it also helps. So I find on Twitter, when I'm really active about a topic, I talk a lot about South Asians a lot in terms of, all aspects of lifestyle. So I tweet about that a lot. I get a lot of feedback from a lot of South Asian readers. And for me, that's important because I want to sort of build that audience for myself, but I also want to make sure I'm following the right people to see, what can lead me to sources, what can lead me to a good story. SEO, which is sort of another seminar on its own or webinar. SEO is really optimized, search engine optimizing. It's really important in lifestyle because, when people are searching for things that are evergreen, they're searching all the time. So if you have a headache and you want to know the best thing to eat or the best remedy that's homemade, you're going to Google it. And chances are people are Googling this, hundreds of times during the day all around the world. So if you really have extra time and you really want to know what stories can do well or potentially do well, do a little bit of digging in Google. A trick that I always like to do when I'm trying to find ideas is sometimes I'll open a window incognito in Google and just type in what are ways to, I'll leave it blank and I'll let it fill out. And that is an indication from Google of what people are searching. And I've had come up with story ideas just from doing that. And it's very simple. It's just going on Google and typing. For anyone who's very familiar with Google, there's also AdWords, which is a site that's meant for businesses, Google AdWords. And what you can do there is sort of look up a phrase or a word, and it tells you how popular it is. And it's really meant for advertisers to buy into certain things. But for me, the sort of trick I learned back from an old editor is to really look at what's trending and what's popular on Google. This is like, I would say, next level in terms of finding stories. The other reasons also work. But to me, I'm a bit of a Google nerd. So I always like to see what's trending or what people are talking about. I follow Google very religiously. There's a Google Trends page that happens every morning when things are happening. The first thing I do in the morning is go on it and I see what people are talking about. It's usually not all lifestyle stuff. It's mostly news, but it's always good to see what people are talking about, to see which lifestyle angles I can come up after it. And lastly is, not everything has to be newsy. So if you think something isn't news, it probably is news. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people tell you, especially when you're in your traditional journalism school. There's this idea that this has to be newsy and this has to be relevant and this has to be topical. But I think in lifestyle, you have some room to really play around with it because, there are stories of people in their everyday lives doing everyday things that, and to come back to it, I hate when a reader says, well, this is not news. But it's not true, because that's a comment that I read all the time. Like, this is not news, but things can be news. And news doesn't have to mean that it's like the most important thing on the radar. Usually it's something that isn't on anyone's radar. So that's important too. To have some other ideas for you, and I'll just put it in the chat. And hopefully this time my computer webinar does not explode. But here's a story of an example of something that I came up with after talking to people. I did a story a few years ago now about divorce, a big feature on South Asians in particular, and how so many women now weren't afraid to talk about divorce, which is a very taboo topic in my community. And literally the story idea happened is because I was at work that time, and we were talking about, someone was talking about someone getting a divorce. And I had said that I didn't know anyone who was divorced. And I was younger at that time, and my coworkers were like, "Yeah, it's probably because you're 23, you don't know anyone who's divorced." And I'm like, "No, I actually don't know any families who are like, I don't really know any. It's really you don't get divorced." And then from there, I started doing a little bit more research and actually asking myself, "Do I know anyone who's divorced? And if so, why? And if not, why?" Divorce rates are really high in Canada. Why aren't people getting divorced? And from there, it turned into a story. Another example of something, that might be newsy or you don't think it's news is another sort of story that I came across just talking to people. I did a story about high functioning anxiety. And this one kind of came through social media. So I follow a lot of meme pages just like anyone else. And I noticed people using that term a lot, high functioning anxiety. And I did a quick Google search. I couldn't really find it anywhere medical. So I went on the Google Trend board that I was talking about, and I did a search. And I wish I had a link to that. But if you actually search that phrase into Google Trends, it just is a spike in the last couple of months. So from there, I started my research. I started asking doctors, is this a term that people use? I did a call out on Facebook, on my Facebook page. I was looking for people, and I did one on Twitter, and I found the woman that I interviewed, she's like, yeah, this is a term that I use, even though it's not a medical term. So that story itself just came from a meme I saw on social media of why people were using this term. So the last part of my presentation, the fun part, is the job hunt, which is a question that I get asked all the time. How do I get a job? Where do I find a job? I'm going to be very realistic. It is not easy. Journalism is an industry that, it saddens me anytime I see a story about layoffs. And it's very rare for companies to even be hiring. But I don't think it's a lost cause. And I think there are many things that can come out of this skill set. So the first most important thing is, building yourself a presence. Really when I say cleaning up your social media feeds, I mentioned earlier, really clean up your social media for yourself, feed is for yourself as well. Go back on Facebook, close all those albums from university that you don't want anyone looking at, because people look through everything, and that's the thing too, and that's the sort of etiquette in general. Close up your feed, I got my friend to shoot me a picture for my Twitter page, fix up your bios, make sure everything is updated, go back on LinkedIn, update everything. There are people that do not update LinkedIn for many, many months and years. Sometimes it's just about even updating your resume. Like I was at the same place for 6 years. I think I didn't update my resume in 6 years at one point until I got a new job. And it just hit me like, holy crap, I didn't really even have anything to show for myself, and I've learned so much. So I always take time to just update things, update, a blog page that I used to have when I was in university. Just make sure all your ends are sort of tied up. Secondly, is just network, and we're lucky we live in an era where you don't have to go to a networking event to network with someone. It's so easy to catch someone on Twitter or catch someone on social media, or send them an email or send them a note about how you like their work, and stay on their radar. And it's also putting yourself out there, and it's a little bit hard sometimes, but for the most part, I know that reporters and editors, they can be friendly, and they are friendly. And if a student ever comes to me, I'm more than willing to share any tips or advice that I have. Be original with your ideas, and hopefully some of my tips can help with that, with just your insight, because when you think about it, editors are getting pitched all the time, all day long, 24 hours a day. Really try to come up with a story that's a little bit different. And before you even pitch that story, go on their website to see if it's done. When I used to freelance, I used to work for a wedding magazine in Toronto. And the first thing I used to do is sort of go make sure it wasn't covered there before, because the worst email that you get back is them saying, no, we just covered this 2 months ago. Sorry, you don't want to be that person. Don't settle. That's another tip, that it's hard, I'd say, if you're trying to freelance and this is your way of earning and this is what you want to do. But sometimes a lot of publications will kind of throw you around, and you really, stand by your story and you don't want to change it, or you think more should come out of it, I would say hold on to it and don't settle. And the other great thing is that you don't have to sort of put yourself in a bubble that's only Canada. You can pitch in the UK, you can pitch in the States, you can pitch anywhere. Lifestyle allows you to be evergreen and really, appear anywhere. It doesn't have to be a Canadian source. Start something yourself. This is advice that people give, but it's like the hardest advice to follow. And I don't mean start, your own newspaper or your own publication. Sometimes it's just really starting, thoughts or passages on Facebook. Start a note, start Twitter, start something on Snapchat, something that just feels routine to you. Because when you want to be an expert in this field and you want to excel in this field, you really have to become an expert. And I think that's the other fun part too, is you really become an expert in certain topics. I have a lot of friends who work in the fashion and beauty side of lifestyle, and a lot of them go on social media, on their own time and review products, or they'll go on Snapchat and talk about an experience they had at a restaurant or a store or a shopping experience, and they're just doing it, for the sake of themselves, because they love to do what they do. So always allow yourself to do that too, and because it really gives you personality as well. And lastly is just think outside news. Like, lifestyle exists everywhere, and I think when you work in lifestyle, the skills that you learn in this industry can be really taken anywhere. You can work for a bank, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but I know people who went from lifestyle to working at a bank, and the reason they got hired is because they have that ability to have personality in their writing and add, context and add color and flavor, or whatever you want to call it, to a story. And sometimes, you don't have to work for a large publication or a magazine or a radio station. You can work for brands. There are tons of brands out there that look for writers and editors and content creators, and tons of brands that a lot of people love. So if you love a brand, you can always reach out to them to see what they're up to. And in 2017, every brand has a social media page, which is great because that just means an extra job pool for journalists. So it's always good to go out in that aspect as well. And I mean, I've traditionally worked in newsrooms, so I can talk about that. But I know a lot of people who, in my year of journalism and sort of going onwards, who have dabbled in all kinds of fields, who work for startups, who work for banks, who work for law firms, who work for retailers because of their journalism degree. So the options are endless. Um, uh, just the job hunt in general, just a few things that I like to do. Get some water. LinkedIn is a great tool. LinkedIn, not only do I use it to look at jobs when I'm in the job hunt phase, but LinkedIn is great because if you have a reporter or an editor that you really admire or you follow, what I like to do is just sort of look at their resume. I like to see where they started. I like to see where they went to school. I like to see where they used to volunteer, where they used to freelance. And for me, it gives me a visual aspect of this person's career because chances are I'm not going to get that chance to talk to them, or maybe I don't want to talk to them. Because sometimes it's a little creepy just to ask people, oh, so how'd you get into what you do? You may feel weird about that, but LinkedIn is always a good cheat sheet. Always be active, and when you're on these sites, just be active on anything. Like I love signing up for things. Sometimes I don't end up using it, but I love to sign up for sort of new social media feeds that users may not even be using it. I know when Snapchat first came out a few years ago now, but newsrooms weren't really using it. I just sort of made an account. I went online. I asked my work if I could take over the Snapchat account. That they're more than happy to allow you to do that, but just really play around. It's very experimental. And the last piece of advice is coffee sessions. So this is something that someone else had told me to do when you're sort of interested in working for a field. It's not an interview. It's not very, professional, just very casual. Go to a coffee shop with an editor, reporter, or someone that, obviously ask first and see if they're up for it. But just really get an informal session of, why they love to do what they do and how your skills can contribute. So this is something that I had done in the past. I wasn't even looking for a job, but out of curiosity, I wanted to see what it would be like to work for a startup. So I, through a friend that I had in a startup, just really spoke to someone and just asked, as a journalist, what can I bring to your organization? Because I was at a point where I didn't know what else I could do with the skills that I had, and I got some really great insight on what I could do. So yeah, I know Don mentioned you can start typing questions. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I will answer the best as I can.
Thanks, Arti. Boy, we certainly had our fun on the webinar today, and the sun went in while talking, so I'm just going to give myself a little bit more light here. I'm not actually operating in a building. Thanks very much for doing that. I kind of have an interesting question about the cycle, right? And how, it's hard to predict because so many people will. There's so many editors. I think they're really hot about something, and then it's almost like there's a cliff, and suddenly you're off the edge of the cliff, and they're just not interested anymore.
Yeah, I think the cycle is interesting because I think some people are too attached to the cycle, and I think that's what really needs to change in the industry. People, especially when you're working in a magazine where you're sort of producing the same type of content and you're planning months and months in ahead. Like most publications right now are done all of their holiday content. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
just need to
yeah,
share.
no problem.
So just because so many people are really planning ahead, they're just so stuck on the routine. And I think that's one of the hardest barriers that a lot of freelancers have is that people are really attached to their cycles and their routine. So it's really about bothering them, but sometimes it's really about, nicely harassing them that that this is worth a story and this is worth further research. And sometimes they will step out of the cycle, a lot of the times they won't. And I think that's something that editors really need to change as well.
Okay. Any questions out there? Doesn't look like it. Don't know why, but I could go on and on talking about this kind of stuff because I have an affinity for it myself. But yeah, I don't see anything. Okay, so thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you very much, Artie. I'm going to
No
mention one
problem.
more thing. That we will have this recording. We may edit it. We may edit it a bit before we put it on.
Yes.
All the blathering I did in between when your thing crapped out, your computer crapped out. You did mention. Oh, here's Janine is doing something here now. Just wait for Janine to finish typing something. You did mention networking, and I'm just going to paste a link in here now. And uh, but you go ahead and answer Janine's question here.
I don't see it yet.
Oh, okay. She's asking if she can and others can message you on Facebook or Twitter for questions.
Yeah, sometimes I don't like to ask questions in large groups either. Feel free on my Twitter. I have a messaging, the message option. So you can shoot me a message, and I'm pretty good with Twitter. So for sure, if you have any questions, you can reach me there as well.
Okay. And so I just have put a link there. And there, you mentioned networking, and there is a mixer tonight in for those of you in the Toronto area. If you'd like to take part, it's a media mixer. It's called Beyond Diversity, and these are great. Obviously, I can't be there tonight. I'm back in Victoria. Poor Janine is stuck in Montreal. Oh well. I nearly got stuck in Paris. Well, you know, on Sunday. Wasn't that a would have been so horrible for that. But I almost did get stuck there again, an airline thing, right? But there is a mixer tonight, so check out the link if you want to go. You should register for it. And beyond the content of what they're talking about with the panel tonight, it's just a great opportunity to meet other people. And I seldom fail to come up with a new idea when I've gone to some sort of event like this. There's always you always meet somebody interesting. Even just listening to what the people are talking about in the panel,
Mhm.
if you can't get five ideas out of what they're talking about, then you need to think about how you're going about getting the ideas. So I'm going to wrap it up now. And thanks again, Artie. And don't forget, people, to look for our next. The mixer is the mixer a regular event or just happening tonight? We try to have mixers in Toronto and Vancouver on a regular basis every 2 or 3 months. Um, and they have different, sometimes it's just a mixer, we're just gathering and we don't have guest speakers or topics. But the one in Toronto tonight definitely has a topic. But yeah, so once again, make sure you are following us on Twitter or on Facebook. CMG Freelance has a Facebook page as well, and you'll see the notifications of the mixers as they come up. Um, and in the meantime, I was just about to wrap up with something else. I can't, it slipped my mind. Artie, help me, help me. Uh,
The mixer.
anyway, the mixer. Anyway, it's a great place to get ideas, and, and,
Awesome.
and it helps you to get things kind of, you know, and I never say that an idea is stolen. I say it's you see somebody else's idea and you change it to make it your own idea and try for a
Mhm.
different angle. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks very much for all your patience, our rocky start, our technical troubles, and we'll do this again soon. Hopefully a little bit smoother. Bye for now.
Thanks again for having me.